Again, welcome to the Miqra. Shabbat Shalom and Happy New Year. The biblical New Year, not the common, or shall I say pagan? Can I use
Pagan.
Yeah, pagan, or the calendar of the world.
Worldly.
Yeah, worldly. But according to the biblical calendar and the biblical instructions, today is the first day of the month, the new month, the first month of the new year. So hallelujah, bless His holy name. Today our study is entitled Expectations and Precautions as you walk in your biblical roots, or subtitled How to Navigate Through the Common Difficulties of the Torah Obedient Way. And so here's where we're going with this today. And I have so many subpoints that it took me 2 slides. But don't fret and don't worry, we're not going to be here all day. At least, well, not all day. But I'm going to give to you what Father has given me to deliver to you today. So we're going to look at the persecution and rejection you may feel when you come into Torah truth and into a realization that you haven't been taught all of the truth of the Scriptures. You know, we've all grown up and spent a lot of time in places that talk about the Bible as the inerrant Word of God, and that it lasts forever, and that this is our hope. You know, the Word that's given to us in the Bible is the way of salvation, and it tells us all we need to walk out this life. But some of the things we weren't told, we're discovering in these days as the Spirit reveals them. And it may be, and I know that we could have testimonies on this because I've heard this from many people, there's persecution and rejection that you may feel from people that you're separating from. And the separation isn't always because you want to separate from them, but because sometimes they want to separate from you. They don't agree with what you're teaching from the Bible. They think that might be for another people, another dispensation or whatever. So there's persecution and rejection. The lonely walk. It can also be a lonely walk when you find yourself alone at home trying to worship the Father according to His ways. And you don't have a whole lot of people that understand the way that you do and want to walk the way that you're walking. So it can be a lonely walk. And then there's the anger reflex, which many Messianics and people coming into the Torah truth feel about what they came out of. They're angry that they weren't taught some of these things. They weren't shown some of these things from the Scriptures. That the New Testament assemblies typically focus in on the New Testament only, with very little Old Testament studies or consideration. And so anger can arise. There's the temptation to beat down the places you came from the Christian church, because you're angry at them. And then tips for navigating when you come into the Torah truth and an understanding. You can get so wrapped up in the Torah because you're just learning it almost like anew as you're studying it. You can kind of swing over to the other extreme, and instead of having a balance between Old and New Testament, you're like always wanting to study the Old Testament and the Torah only. And so that can be an imbalance in our lives too. So we need to navigate through that issue that we have. Becoming a Torah terrorist, really beating down on people because they're breaking God's law, instead of showing the love and compassion of Elohim and giving people the opportunity to listen to the Spirit and learn as they walk out this walk. And then there's balancing Spirit and truth, diminishing the work of Yahusha or Jesus in our walk, because we're so Torah emphatic that we forget all about the redemption that the Messiah brought. And then here's another page full of things we'll cover. Trashing Paul in the New Testament writings, because Paul seems to be contradicting in some places what we're feeling the Spirit teaches from the New Testament and from the Old Testament Scriptures. There's the trap of Messianic Judaism and their traditions, that influence a lot of people that are coming into the way of Torah. Getting your information from rabbinical sources can be a source of issue that you would have, difficulty of understanding the true walk of faith with the Messiah. Endless genealogies and knowing your identity, getting all caught up in what your genealogy is instead of recognizing the gospel is given to everyone who believes. John 3:16. We'll talk about that. Supporting the state of Israel, not understanding who Israel are and who we are. There's the pitfall of the names games and the derailment of your focus by far out theories that you'll hear on the internet, especially by other people who call the Father by the same name that we're calling the Father, but they have different ideas and some other different ways of expressing their faith. And then there's change lust, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So, let's begin. The persecution and rejection you feel when you come into Torah truth. The first thing we want to do when we have discovered Bible truth is to share it, right? And isn't that a natural response that we have? We fall into the trap of becoming very zealous. Zealous for this new thing, this new truth, this discovery that we have from the Old Testament scriptures about how Father wants us to walk. Those ancient paths, the things that were established in the beginning at creation, and that the ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, walked in, and that the sons of Israel walked in those laws and right rulings, and they were given them to provide life and help and health to the people of Israel, to please the Father, because the Father knows our design and He wants to give us the instructions like how we are to care for ourselves and our bodies and navigate through life. And so we fall into the trap of becoming very zealous, and that comes at a price, because we take out some things on others. We regard the fact that we haven't known these truths before, and we want to get that gospel, that message out to people, and so we hammer people with this new truth that we've come into. And the natural result of that is that people don't want to hear, our ragging on them, and giving them a hard time about where they are in their walk of faith, because they know Jesus and they have experienced salvation, and they feel very content in that. And so when we start beating down on them, on keeping commandments and things like these that they haven't been exposed to before in the teachings that they've been given, they reject us. And so we feel that rejection. So here's the response to that. Isaiah 53:3. Yahusha felt rejected. And the verse reads, "He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised, and we did not esteem him." And so we're to be like the Master. Isn't that the goal of our walk, is to be like the Master? He's the one that came and explained to us the meaning of the Torah and the prophets, and how the Father wants us to walk before Him. And He told us that we're going to face rejection just as He did. It says in Matthew 24:9, "And then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name." So when we walk in His name, when we walk like Him and do the things He told us to do, the world's going to hate us. It doesn't want to hear it. It doesn't want to be shamed and felt to be made guilty for their lifestyle. They want to live the way they want to live. And so they're going to hate us because we are walking uprightly and bringing a message to them that they need to repent. In the fourth gospel, the gospel according to Lazarus, Yahusha said, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." So be encouraged You must be doing something right if you are experiencing what the Master went through. So that should be a sign to us. If we are being persecuted, if we are being hated, if we're being despised and rejected, whether it be by the world or by the people that don't want to hear about obeying the Father's commandments, then we're experiencing what the Master went through. Because he was rejected and experienced persecutions from the very religious leaders of his day that were thought to be teaching truth. But they were teaching their own doctrine, their own tradition, and not the truth. So Paul talks about filling up in our flesh Christ's afflictions. He says in Colossians 1:24, "Now I rejoice in what was suffered for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions, for the sake of his body, which is the church, or the assembly." When we strive to be like our Master, we will suffer afflictions as he did. The scholars sometimes struggle over this idea of filling up what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions. As though what Messiah suffered was not enough. He didn't suffer enough, or he didn't fulfill all of the affliction or suffering that needs to be suffering. Well, that's not really what Paul is saying here. What Paul is saying is that we're going to share in his affliction. Not that he didn't suffer enough affliction, but that we're going to walk, when we walk the way he walked, and we point to him as the way, the truth, and the life, then we're going to suffer afflictions as he did. And so in some sense, we're filling up what is still lacking. What is still lacking in Messiah's afflictions are those afflictions that we must experience as followers of him. So we're going to suffer persecution and affliction just as he did. What to remember? You are attacking when we bring these new truths that we learn about the Torah and the idea of the commandments and the Sabbath, the festivals, obedience, and all of those things. We are attacking, at least that's the way it's perceived, a long-held belief system in the Christian world, because they've been told and have believed that Jesus is the answer to all of our issues, that Jesus is the way. He's our salvation. All we need is Jesus. And to some extent that's a truth being told. But there's more to the walk than just believing in Jesus. It's about walking the way he walked. And so when we bring commandments and put them in the face of people and attack their walk of faith, then they're going to resist that. If we're not doing it gently and in love, most people are extremely resistant to challenges of the things that they have held to dearly all their lives. And that's very understandable. That's human nature. We've been taught things that we've put our future into, the stake of our eternal destiny, into those things that have been taught to us and that we have believed. So give people time to allow the Spirit to bring convincing and convicting, and share those things gently with others. Because I think people are yearning and searching for truth, and they know that there is something lacking in the places where they're worshiping. And so as long as we don't throw it in their face and use the wrong approach, there are people that want to hear the message that we bring. Secondly, there's the lonely walk. The second thing that will happen to you when you embrace truth is that you will either voluntarily leave the people who won't listen to you, or you will be given the left foot of disfellowship. And so sometimes, the testimony of a good friend of mine who was a Seventh-day Adventist. When he came into these truths of the Torah and obedience to the laws and commandments, he said, now that I've learned these things, I can't go back. I can't become a regular part of the fellowship I once had and had most of my life. And this is a very elderly gentleman friend of mine. And so he said, I can't go back. And so sometimes we are led by the Spirit, and we're led by our own conviction, by our own experience, to leave the places that won't embrace the truths that we have discovered. Because we want to be in a place where we can freely discuss the laws and the joy of obedience and all of the benefits and all of the blessing and the delighting in the Sabbath and all of those things that Father wants to bring to us. We can't experience that in the places that are rejecting those things, but haven't come along in the same manner that we have into the truth of the Old Testament Scriptures. The left foot of fellowship or disfellowship is when they can't stand you bringing that message to them anymore and they ask you to leave. And that's happened to some of us too. And that's a natural consequence of that conflict that we have, what we're teaching and trying to walk in with what other folks are teaching and walking in. So that disfellowship sometimes happens. And we become lonely because of it. Remember that we're called to be a set-apart people. In Leviticus 19:2, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy because I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am holy. The holy life is a set-apart life. It's a life of separation from the way you used to be and you used to walk and conduct yourself with the way the Father is calling us to walk in. And so the set-apart life can be a lonely life because the world and others, people that we used to be, meet in their homes and they in our homes, they don't want to meet with us anymore because we're different now. Something's changed. They interpret it as we've fallen from grace. We've adopted another version, if you will, of New Testament faith, and they don't agree with it, so they don't want to fellowship with us anymore. But this set-apart life is pleasing to the Father. The set-apart life is Father's designed to draw you away from your past lifestyle and into His way of living. And that's the lonely feeling that we find when we walk in obedience to His commandments. Then there's the anger reflex, like the stages of the loss of loved ones. Anger will likely overtake you when you realize that you have inherited errors from your forefathers. And that comes from the prophet Jeremiah 16:19 that says, Yahweh, my strength and my stronghold, and my refuge in the day of distress, to you the nations will come from the ends of the earth and say, our fathers have inherited nothing but falsehood, futility, and things of no profit. And so people that are listening to the Spirit come into this realization that much of what they've been practicing in their walk of faith has been futility. It's been inherited lies. It's been deceptive doctrines and practices. Like, who could argue, who've studied it out, that the law of Elohim has not been done away with? And yet that's what we've been told. And so these things, these doctrines that have been taught us, and when we realize that we've inherited those things, can cause us to be angry. Angry at the people who taught them to us, angry in general, and then our disposition is one of anger instead of one of joy and peace. So don't dwell in anger because you were fed errors. Praise the Father that you've come out of those errors and now can see and know the truth. They were fed errors. And those people that fed us those errors believed that those things were truth. So they weren't doing it with the intent to harm us. They were teaching what they are teaching because they believe that to be the truth. And they are convicted of it and want to please the Father and want to please the Son. But they weren't given the right information themselves. They were fed these same errors from their forefathers. And they inherited the same lies from their forefathers. So be angry, but sin not. This anger can negatively affect your testimony. Another response and condition that we'll find ourselves in when we come into truth is we have this temptation to beat down Christianity because they delivered some wrong teachings to us, and we recognize and realize that now. They got some things wrong, but so has everyone else. But they love the Father. They love God just as you did when you believed as they did, or as they do. And so beating them down is not a solution that is profitable, and it's not going to help you, and it's not going to help them, because they too are trying to love and please God. And so we need to realize that and recognize that when we're speaking to our friends in the churches. The other thing is you probably came into faith because of somebody there. You know, your Sunday school teacher might have taught you about Jesus and what Jesus did in dying on the cross for you. And so you owe a certain a debt of gratitude to them. You don't owe them the anger and the beatdown that you're trying to give to them, if that's, you know, the way you're approaching it. So remember that you were there once as well. Father received you and loved you and brought you along, and they're trying to please the Father too. So Elohim used that imperfect vessel, the Christian church, to draw you into fellowship with Him. And I call it an imperfect vessel not to be an offense to anyone, but it is an imperfect vessel. We're still in a state of imperfection as well. You know, the Messianic assemblies, because we don't have it 100% right yet. And along the way, we recognize those things, like we did with the biblical calendar a couple weeks ago. We recognized that we didn't have it just right. And so we have to adjust and repent and change the way that we express and walk out our faith. So you were once there in your walk, and Yahweh did not reject you when you were there. So let's not reject and beat down others who are where we were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. And let's give the Spirit an opportunity through the gracious delivering of the Word from our own mouths and using a gentle and loving approach. Allow the Spirit to work in them. We don't have to be the convicting force in their lives. We just have a responsibility to deliver truth and let the Spirit do His work as well. Peter says this about how to share your faith. But in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. That's the NIV version. So instead of attacking the place that we came out of and the people that we were once in fellowship with, we should be displaying a good walk and good behavior. And when our behavior speaks to the correctness of what we're believing and how we're worshiping the Mighty One, then people will take notice of that. Because there are so many problems and sin issues in the church that is getting worse and worse and is not being confronted. The people that want to serve God and worship God are recognizing these things that are happening. And when they see a people that are walking out their faith with good behavior, like the true faith is supposed to manifest, then they're gonna ask you, you know, where do you worship, and you know, why are you this way, and how is it that you're different? And that's when, with gentleness and respect and keeping a clear conscience, we can give a reason for why we're worshiping the way that we do. Hallelujah. Again, Torah only studies when we break into a realization that Torah really is for us. It was given as an inheritance to the sons of Israel, and we are the sons of Israel. So the Torah was given to us as the proper walk before the Father. And so when we realize that, the Torah takes on a whole new light. And we get all excited about it, and that's all we want to read and study, to the exclusion sometimes of the New Testament and of the kind of fulfillment that Messiah brought to some of those things, and then the explanations that the other New Testament writers brings to the table for our understanding of how the Old Testament law and prophecies are fulfilled and are to be fully experienced in the new walk of faith because of the Messiah's death on the tree. And so what people do, Messianics, people of the Hebrew roots movement, is that they only want to study the Torah. And there are people, not that it's a bad thing, but they do the Torah parshas, the Torah portions. And so the reading and study throughout the whole year is a section of the Torah. They go through the entire Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy. It takes them 1 year, or in some cycles. Some folks do it every 3 years, so they can go slower. But the whole idea is that all of their study is focused on the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, to the exclusion of the prophets sometimes, and the writings, and the New Testament. And they do spend very little time exploring the New Testament interpretation of the Old Testament law. So that's a temptation that people run into, and we need to be aware of it so that we don't fall into the trap of only studying the Torah and not studying all of the rest of the Bible. The Torah is just a small portion at the beginning of our Bibles, but we have the whole Bible to read and to study and to learn and to glean from. So let's be careful that we don't get caught in that Torah-only study mentality. The scripture says in Deuteronomy 6, 24 to 25, that the Torah is our righteousness. And this is one of the reasons why people can be caught up in just the Torah, because they think, well, if the Torah is our righteousness, then we can do it on our own if we just follow the Torah. If we just obey the commandments, the salvation is there for us. And so here's the verse in Deuteronomy. The Lord, this is NIV again. So the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, and for our survival as it is today. It will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment before the Lord our God, just as He commanded us. And remember when we did that Torah terminology study, the word commandment here, because it's in the singular, it refers to the entire volume of the instructions of the Torah. The commandment means the covenant, and it encapsulates all that the Father calls us to do by His commandments. So the point here is that it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment. And that's truth. That's what the Father has said, that it's righteousness for us when we're obedient. And so the idea here that some people have is that if it's righteousness for us to obey the commandment and containing all of the commandments, then we don't really need the New Testament, right? At least that's what people think. And so they want to just really focus and hone in on the Torah itself and dig in and discover all that can be discovered, all the insights, and drill down deep, and so that we can be walking out this righteousness in our own strength and in our own power. And of course we know that this is not true. It is righteousness for us when we're careful to observe all of this commandment. But it's the Father who enables us by His Spirit to observe all of this commandment, all of this Torah, all of this covenant relationship that we have with Him through obedience. And so the Torah, all of the commandments of the Torah are righteous, according to the psalmist David. They're all righteous. And it's righteousness for us when we do those things. But we need the power of the Spirit We can't do it in our own strength and our own power. And so we need to recognize that the Spirit has His work to do in us, and that's why the Father put His Spirit in us. Paul says this in Romans chapter 8, "There is now therefore no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit." And so here's the difference between trying to find a fulfillment of righteousness in our own flesh by disobeying commandments, and the work of the Spirit, the important aspect of that Spirit who enables us and empowers us to walk in obedience to His commandments. So there's no condemnation to those who walk after the Spirit. "For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death." And what that means is the Torah is not the law of sin and death. The law of sin and death is described in the curses that are brought upon us because of transgression of the Torah. So when we walk in the Spirit of life, we're free from that condemnation that comes from the disobedience of His Torah, because we can walk in it now. We can be fully compliant and obedient with His ways. And the Spirit is what enables us to do that. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God, sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit. So that righteousness of the law that we read about in Deuteronomy 6 is fulfilled in us when we're walking in the Spirit. It is righteousness to obey those commandments, but the Spirit enables us to do so. Hallelujah. Becoming Torah terrorists. And here is where I forgot to fill out the slide. But Torah terrorists are those folks who embrace the commandments of the Father, and they want to tell everybody about it. They want to watch over your life and over your life. They want to watch what you're doing, and they want to criticize every little thing that they perceive you're not doing in obedience to a commandment, and they're going to call you out on it. Those are the Torah terrorists. I don't think we want to be Torah terrorists. I think we want to show the same love and compassion and kindness and forgiveness that the Father showed us. Isn't that really a better way? And so, Torah terrorism sometimes rules and reigns in some Messianic assemblies and among some people, but that's really not the right path that we want to take, because it doesn't lead to any good for the people of Elohim. Let's be Torah, what can we say about this? Instead of Torah terrorists, what should we be? Torah walkers. I don't know.
Amen.
Somebody
Amen.
give me a T word that means it's a Torah. A Torah traveler.
I like
Hallelujah.
that.
Let's be Torah travelers and not Torah terrorists. Thank you, my sister
Amen.
Rachel. Hallelujah. That's a good way to go. Torah travelers. Balancing spirit and truth. With this newfound understanding of Torah as truth comes the common mistake of abandoning the work of the Spirit. We kind of already talked about that. We think we all have a need in the instructions of the law of Moses, but spiritual things are spiritually discerned. Again, the importance of bringing the Spirit into play in our lives and not thinking that we can walk out a true, pleasing walk before the Father in our own power and in our own flesh. Don't jump from the frying pan into the fire. And this can happen in several different ways. Judaism has law but no spirit. Christianity has the Spirit but very little emphasis on the law and on obedience to commandments. Let's not jump from Christianity to Judaism, and that's what Messianic Judaism is all about, because they want to bring Jesus into their Judaism religion and worship Him according to their customs and traditions. You know, they want to have the best of of all that Judaism offers, but also have Jesus as a part of that walk. But that's like jumping from the frying pan into the fire, because you're going to run into a whole new boatload of issues if you jump from Christianity into Messianic Judaism. And we have people that are here today that did that without realizing it was a step the Father took them on their walk, on their journey, but they soon realized that all the issues of Judaism just compounded the confusion of how the Father wants us to walk. Remember the purpose for the Spirit that was to be given in the New Covenant. And that comes from Ezekiel 36 and other places. A new heart also I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them. So the Spirit was given in the new covenant in order to help us, to enable us to do the things that Father had called us to do. He didn't annul his laws or his commandments when he sent his Son to the tree. What he did was he enabled us, because of that death on the tree, that demonstration of the pure love of Elohim, and the sending of the Spirit to indwell our hearts, to enable us to do what we were unable to do in the past. And now there's no more excuse. It's not that the law was too hard or too difficult or too far away, that we were unable, that he gave his people a law that they were unable to keep. The issue was the issue of the heart of man, the rebellious nature in man, the stiff-necked stubbornness of man. And so the Spirit was put into us in order that we may listen to and be able to do the things that were always within our reach, but we were too stubborn to do it. So now those things we are able to do by his Spirit. Another issue we run into when we find Torah truth is the diminishing of Yahusha, or Jesus. Is he less than what we were taught in the Christian churches? Is he any less than that? Is he not the Son of God, the Son of Elohim? Did he not come to take away the sins of the world? Did he not, as described in several places, was he not the creator of heaven and earth? Wasn't he there when all things were created? And that's Colossians 1:13-22. He says all things were created by him and through him. And in John, the 4th Gospel, chapter 1, it says, nothing was made apart from him that was made. So this one who manifested in human flesh and died on the tree was also the creator, and yet sometimes in some Messianic circles, he's diminished. He's just a man. He's not the mighty one. He's not from the mighty one. Well, he was from the mighty one in their point of view, but he was appointed to do a certain work, but he wasn't the creator, or he wasn't Elohim. He wasn't with Elohim in the beginning. And so we need to be careful not to diminish, because we think now that we're enlightened by the Torah and the prophets and the New Testament writings. Somehow we're enlightened to be able to diminish who the Messiah is. He's the seed of Abraham, the offspring of David, who rules. Everything Old Testament and New centers on the work of Messiah to obtain redemption for his people, to close the gap between us and the Father, to bring about the restoration of all things. But Jesus doesn't always fit the Jewish expectation of the Messiah, and Jesus seems to be transgressing the Sabbath, if we read the New Testament episodes in a certain way. And yet we've talked about those things. He wasn't really transgressing the law or the Sabbath. He was transgressing rabbinic interpretation and rabbinic law, not the Father's law. But they also say Jesus couldn't get along with the Pharisees, and they are the experts, weren't they? So what was Jesus' problem that he couldn't get along with the religious leaders? Let's not think that we can have a relationship with the Father apart from the Son. Because John says in 1 John chapter 2, who is the liar It is the man who denies that Yahushua is the Messiah. Such a man is the anti-Messiah. He denies the Father and the Son. No one who denies the Son has the Father. Whoever acknowledges the Son has the Father also. So we have to realize that just because we came into this understanding of the Torah, it doesn't diminish who the Messiah is. It's the relationship that we have with the Father has to be through Him. Because if you don't have the Son, you don't have the Father. See that what you have heard from the beginning remains in you. If it does, you also will remain in the Son and in the Father. So here John's alluding to, in the beginning, of the creation, the ancient past, the things of the past that the Father revealed in His Word. That we need to allow those things to remain in us. And when we do, we will also remain in the Son and in the Father. So it's all about, that combined package of understanding who the Son is, not diminishing who He is, and understanding that what the Father gave us in the beginning is something that is supposed to remain in us. We're supposed to be doing all those things that He gave us from creation. The only begotten Son. Yahushua is the only begotten Son. Begotten has to do with human birth, not necessarily of the substance of who a person is. Begotten is a human term. A son comes from the seed of a father. The mother begets or gives birth to a human being. And so that's why it says that Jesus, or Yahushua, is the only begotten Son. He's the only Son of the Father that was given human birth. And again, in the fourth Gospel, chapter 1, verse 14, Yahushua is Elohim coming to us in human flesh. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So let's not diminish who He is and accept some alternative theory or view about who that man was who died on the tree to obtain forgiveness of sins for us. Trashing Paul and the other New Testament writings is another kind of response that people have. Some Messianics have rejected all of Paul's writings. They reject him as a false prophet. They won't read him because Paul seems to be against Elohim's law. In some places that sounds like that's what he's saying. Paul seems to be presenting a different gospel. In some places that sounds like what he's saying. Paul seems to be elevating a lawless Jesus. The Torah and the prophets are reliable, but what we have is a misunderstanding of Paul. The Torah and the prophets are reliable, but Paul also was an expert in the Torah and the prophets. And sometimes his understanding is greater than our own understanding. He studied the Torah and the prophets all of his life. That was his occupation. It was learning all that he could, memorizing Scripture, knowing what the Scriptures and how they're to be interpreted. So also bear in mind what Peter says about Paul's writings. He says, bear in mind that our Lord's patience means salvation, just as our dear brother Paul also wrote you with the wisdom that God gave him. He writes the same thing in all his letters, speaking in them of these matters. His letters contain some things that are hard to understand, which ignorant and unstable people distort as they do the other scriptures for their own destruction. So it's a mistake to reject Paul. What that says about the people that are rejecting Paul is that they're ignorant and unstable. Ouch. Ouch. We don't want to jump to these kind of same conclusions about Paul because we don't understand what Paul's saying. And we have a different take, a different interpretation of Paul because we haven't really studied out the Torah. We haven't understood the prophecies. And so we fall short of having all the tools necessary to correctly understand a Torah scholar like Paul, who spoke on a level above our pay grade, as it were. You know, he was speaking over our heads sometimes, and we haven't understood the things that Paul's saying. So therefore, Peter says about Paul, "Dear friends, since you already know this, be on your guard so that you may not be carried away by the error of lawless men and fall from your secure position." So it's lawless men that we're to be aware, to be weary of, and to be aware of, so that we don't fall for the errors that they're dishing out. Lawless men, people that don't know the law. Paul knew the law, and we reject him because we don't know the law as well as we should. And Christian theologians haven't understood and come to grips with the law the way that Paul has, and so they misinterpret him. So let's be careful that we're not rejecting something that the Father has given us by the way of Paul's letters, his correspondences, which are there to help us if we'll take the time to study those things out and draw from the resource of the foundation of our faith, which is the Torah. Then we will begin to understand what Paul's talking about when he speaks of those difficult matters. It is a mistake to disregard Paul's contributions to our understanding of the redemption brought by Yahusha. It would be tragic to throw out all the New Testament just because we don't have all the details of understanding the law and the prophets. And that's another mistake some people make. They throw out all the New Testament, and they're Old Testament only people. That is a mistake. And we don't want to fall into that trap, thinking that we're better off just reading the Torah and the prophets. Because we need the testimony of Jesus. We need the testimony of Paul and Peter and John and the other writers of the New Testament to help us understand the things that aren't always necessarily clear, that weren't always revealed in a plain, easy to understand way. Because even as the Messiah spoke in parables, often the Torah and the prophets has a parabolic delivery, and sometimes they're difficult to understand. We just need to dig in deeper and gain insight by the Spirit to understand all that's being said as we read the Old Testament. The trap of Messianic Judaism, I kind of already alluded to this, that the Messianic Judaism is the mixing of Christianity and Judaism. The Messianic movement is an attempt to return to our roots of recognizing the work of the Messiah. Hebrew roots is kind of Messianic movement renamed in order to make it palatable, because Messianic seems to have become so many different things. And then some people are adopting the label Christian roots movement. And that's kind of just the same thing too, because they don't want to be known as Hebrew roots because of the errors in the Hebrew roots congregation, who don't want to be in error like many of the Messianic congregations. So it's all just this relabeling and relabeling of who we are. We're a people who are seeking out the Word, the Father's will for our lives. We're trying to understand and incorporate all of the Scriptures into our understanding of the Father's will. Not just the New Testament canon of Scriptures, but bring it all into play and understand that the New Testament is based upon what the Old Testament shows us. And when we put it all together and we understand who the Messiah is, and really the goal and predestination doctrines and adoption, some of those things Paul talks about, when we can put all those pieces of the puzzle together, we can understand the Father's plan for bringing about redemption and restoration of the whole universe back to Himself. And so let's not be too caught up in labels. Like I prefer biblical roots now, but that's just another label, and it's to separate it from Christian roots label and Hebrew roots label and Messianic label. But, maybe a year from now, I'm gonna have to change that if a lot of people start calling themselves biblical roots.
How about just the remnant?
The remnant, that's a good label.
We are Israel.
We are Israel, we are the remnant, we are the obedient people who are following the Messiah. So, okay. So, I alluded to earlier about stepping out of the pan into the fire, the frying pan to the fire. And I was talking about Messianic Judaism, and I said here messy Judaism because if I put the whole word, it would jump to 2 lines. But if that means, messy Judaism means anything to you, then receive that as well. It is messy in that it's all mixed up. So warnings against swapping religious affiliations. We can go from Babylonian paganism, which to a large extent Christianity is, because they've adopted the practices of the world, and they've rejected the practices that the Father established in His law. So they brought all that Babylonian influence, December 25th, Easter, and all these other things that were brought from Babylon, the way that the world was worshiping their gods, and the times and the seasons that they worshiped them, the manner in which they worshiped. And so that Babylonian paganism was adopted by the Roman Catholic Church in the early era of the Christian Church. And so what we have left, the errors that we've inherited from our fathers, amount in a great deal to Babylonian paganism. But if we go from Christianity to Judaism, which is guilty of Babylonian legalism, the legalism of having established your own law to replace God's law, then how is it that you're any better off? What you've actually done is you've doubled the errors and the inherited lies that you're practicing. You're doing all the paganism that comes from Babylon, and now you're also doing the legalism that comes from Judaism. From antinomianism, no law, to a man-made legal system. The problem with man-made legalism, then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, "Why do the disciples transgress the tradition of the elders?" And there's the first clue that you have something other than what the Father has commanded. It's the tradition of the elders that the scribes and Pharisees are trying to press on to Jesus and His disciples. For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But He answered and said to them, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor your father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But you say, Whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me." In other words, they take what belongs to father and mother from their own pockets, and they give it as a gift instead to the temple. "And honor not his father or mother, he shall be free." And so this was the teaching of the Pharisees. You're free if you take that which you're supposed to be supporting your father and mother and honoring them with, and giving it to the temple as an offering gift. And thus you have made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. So the tradition forced them into a practice of, instead of honoring their father and mother, giving their monies to the temple for whatever purpose the temple might have had for it. And so the Messiah says, "Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." And there's a really important word there, that man-made religious systems teach for doctrines the commandments of men, and not the commandments of the Almighty. And that's how you recognize false religion, is they teach for doctrines, their teachings. The doctrines of their faith walk are based in the commandments of men and not in the commandments of the Father. Here's another word that Yahushua gave concerning the Pharisees. They bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for to be seen by men, for they make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. And so by offering as doctrines the commandments of men, they're causing people to miss the opportunity and the knowledge of how to enter into the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is entered into by coming into agreement with the Almighty, as we talked about last week. And it's about obedience to His commandments and not to be caught up in our own religious system, our own religious way of having our own doctrines and teachings based in the traditions and teachings and customs of men. Messiah also said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer, and therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you encompass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. And this is also the way of man-made religion, is that we reach out and proselytize people and bring them into our denomination, into our walk of faith, and they become zealous, like a person does when they discover what they believe is true. They become so zealous that they're twice as zealous as you were, you who brought them in. And you know, if it's the matter of dispensationalism, I'll just use that as an example, they become even more zealous for dispensationalism. And you can't talk them out of it. They are so convinced in their own mind about what has been taught to them that you know, they're, as Messiah described them, they're twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. Child of hell meaning that the destiny of people that are walking in those man-made customs and practices are headed for the grave. They're headed for the lake of fire because they have not understood the difference between man-made religion and the faith walk that Father is calling us to. Okay, I'm going to skip that one, being called rabbi. Getting your information from rabbinical sources. The Talmud has two components. The Talmud was written by the rabbis, and those two sources are the Mishnah, written about 200 of the Common Era. It says it's a written compendium of rabbinic Judaism's oral Torah, and the Gemara, that's the other component of the Talmud. The Gemara is an elucidation of the Mishnah, and related Tanaitic writings that often ventures onto other subjects and expounds broadly on the Hebrew Bible. So Talmud literally translated means instruction in Hebrew. The term may refer to either the Gemara alone or the Mishnah and Gemara together. So what's the issue here with the Talmud? Why is it a danger to be trapped into regarding the Talmud as a reliable source of information for our faith walk? Well, number one, we already saw from the New Testament writings that the Messiah was very much against what the rabbis were teaching in regard to traditions and customs, and that their traditions and customs nullified the word of Elohim. The entire Talmud consists of 63 tractates, and in standard print is over 6,200 pages long.
What are tractates?
Just like sections, like we would regard as books of the Bible or chapters of a book, just sections. It is written in Tanaitic Hebrew and Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. And honestly, I don't know the difference between those two things. The Babylonian Aramaic, of course, Aramaic is a different language. The Tannaitic Hebrew is the Hebrew of that day. It was the Hebrew of Babylon, the Hebrew that was spoken in Babylon by those who spoke Hebrew. So the Talmud contains the teachings and opinions of thousands of rabbis, dating from before the Common Era through the 5th century of the Common Era, on a variety of subjects, including halakha, which means walk or law, literally means walk. The hour walk is the halakha. Jewish ethics, philosophy, customs, history, lore, and many other topics, including genealogies, which we are warned against getting caught up in. The Talmud is the basis for all codes of Jewish law and is widely quoted in rabbinic literature. So when an emphasis, that would be another sign or indicator of a false religion, is when people adopt another source of information, another writing, another book, another author, to replace or to interpret for us the Bible, and that person brings in a certain set of interpretations, then that's a false religion. And that's what Judaism has done by this Talmud and the rabbis offering their own interpretations and suggestions and having it all written down in a book. And it often contradicts the word of Elohim. But to study the Talmud instead of the Bible itself is a great mistake, because now you're filling your mind with all of the things that were rebuked by the Master, and all of the things that we're not supposed to believe and do. So to adopt the Talmud or some other religious book of faith, and you can probably think of a couple off the top of your head, I won't name them, is highly problematic for us who want to walk in obedience to the Father. Getting your information from those who do not acknowledge Yahusha as Messiah is a problem, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Talmud. Warning, danger. You will be getting a skewed view of the Scriptures if you're putting your faith and your time into studying the Talmud or any other book that is not the Scriptures. They won't tell you, the rabbis and Jews who follow Judaism won't tell you how and in what way their interpretation might confirm Yahusha as the prophet like Moshe. They're not going to let you know those details because they don't want you to believe that Yahusha is the true Messiah. So they're not going to show you from the Hebrew text. The experts in the Hebrew text aren't going to tell you where the Hebrew text aligns with Yahusha being Messiah. They will try to explain to you where Yahusha as Messiah contradicts their interpretation of certain passages of Scripture. They're never going to tell you where it aligns, because they don't believe it. They will use their expertise in Hebrew to convince you that Yahusha was not the Messiah. Endless genealogies is an offshoot of that. But we need to know our identity. Avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law. Paul says to Timothy, for they are unprofitable and vain. So although, in the past generation, the past 40 years, there's been an interesting emphasis on roots, whether the roots of dark-skinned people, roots of light-skinned people, of other shades of skin color and tone. This idea of roots, although it may be interesting and helpful to know who your ancestors were, it doesn't make any difference at all in our faith walk with the Father. Because it's whosoever believes that comes in. Whoever walks the same walk of faith as Abraham that are considered the children of Elohim and inherit the promises. So it doesn't matter what your genealogy is, the color of your skin, where you came from, what nation you were born in. It's all about whether or not you turn to Elohim and receive the redemption that the Messiah provided. No vain jangling, I put that here just because I don't really know what jangling means. I think it means like arguing maybe. Striving with people, vain jangling. And this is King James Version language. Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies, and minister questions rather than godly edifying, which is of faith. So do. And now the end of the commandment is charity out of a pure heart, Paul tells Timothy. Charity or love out of a pure heart and of a good conscience and of faith, unfeigned. It's not faked, it's not put on, we're not play acting when we walk out our faith. From which some have swerved, having turned aside unto, there it is, vain janglings. Vain jangling. So we don't want to be caught up in the contention of arguing over things that don't matter. Let's stay focused on the Word and about how we can serve the Master. But as many as received Him, to them He gave power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on His name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of Elohim, of God. So it's the whosoever's that are receivers of the inheritance. It's not about somebody who's born by a certain genealogy or a certain blood or a certain flesh color. Who are you anyway? Paul tells us this, and we studied this in the past from Ephesians chapter 2. Consequently, you Gentiles, you who used to be Gentiles or walked with the Gentiles, are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with Elohim's people and member of Elohim's household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Messiah Yahushua himself as the chief cornerstone. In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in Yahuwah. And in him you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which Elohim lives by his Spirit. And the mystery of the Messiah is that we are Israel. That's the essence of the mystery. That through the gospel the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of the one body, and sharers together in the promise in Messiah Yahushua. So we are Israel. That's the bottom line of it all. Is when we come into relationship with the Almighty through the Messiah, we are grafted in, adopted in, woven into the fabric of Israel. We become Israel ourselves, along with all the people of faith. Supporting the state of Israel is another mistake people make. Don't make the mistake of thinking that only Jews are protected by the promise made to Abraham. And I'm talking about Genesis 12, 1 through 3, where it says that those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. And so, in some circles, the interpretation of that is that we need to be supporting the Jews because they are Abraham's children. But what they don't realize is that the people that are in Messiah are all fall under this category as Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And so that passage, that blessing, that promise made to Abraham was made to us as well because we are Abraham's offspring. Not just the Jews. And in fact, many of the Jews aren't Abraham's offspring because they don't have the faith of Abraham and they don't believe in the true Messiah. And so supporting them with our monies is a mistake because we're just throwing money out, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Who is this that so many Messianics and Christians are supporting? Why are Messianics giving their money and support to a people who despise our Messiah? Why would we do that? Our money is supposed to be to help the community of faith, the people who are in need, the poor, the widow, the orphan. We shouldn't hate the Jews or hate the state of Israel, but we shouldn't prop them up either with our monies. We can't win them over with our money. And people make that mistake. They think if we show our support to the state of Israel, that they're going to have a change of heart toward us. They're going to embrace us. They don't care anything about our Messiah. They hate him. They despise him. They ridicule him. And they curse him in every service that they have, every Sabbath service, they curse the Messiah. It's the last prayer in their service. They curse the Messiah. The Jews hate the anti-missionaries. That's us. We're anti-missionaries because they perceive us as trying to pull them away from their religion and into faith in Messiah. Those who are turning some away from Jewish traditions and beliefs to the Christian Jesus, but they'll gladly take our money. Who wouldn't, right? You going to offer somebody money? Just give people money? Anybody would take it, right? And so that's what it is with being careful. Again, I say we shouldn't hate them, but we should be careful about how we use the things that Father has put into our hands to help out the community of faith in our needs. The pitfall of the names games, and this comes down to, do you call him Jesus or Yahusha or Yeshua or Yehoshua or any number of other names that people call him by? How about the Lord, Yahweh, Yehovah, Yahuwah? We've done studies on these names and we've come to a conclusion of our own about how we should be pronouncing the name. But let's not be all caught up in criticizing others who may have been given a different word, a different revelation about what we should call him. Let's just receive those as brothers and sisters. Even people that call him the Lord out of the Christian church, or Yahweh out of the early Messianic movement, or Yehovah, which is the popular name now, or Yahuwah, which is less popular, but it's gaining in popularity. It's not about whether we're right and they're wrong, or they're right and we're wrong. It's about listening to the Father and calling upon his name. However we understand his name to be spoken, that's how we should call upon his name. And feel good about that without criticizing others who may say it a little differently. Arguing the correct pronunciation of the names is a point of ridicule by our detractors. We receive a lot of criticism because they don't even, they claim to call upon the Father's name, but they can't even agree that what that name is. That's the criticism. And we're held in contempt by those people that recognize that. So let's stop doing that. Let's stop causing this to be a debate that separates us in a point of criticism of others who are also trying to call upon the Father by his true name. Derailment of your focus by far out theories. We're almost done. We only have 2 more slides. Theories about the new moon, about when a day begins, theories about the biblical calendar. We've talked about those in the last couple of weeks, and of course I had to change our view. Theories debating a spherical or flat earth. You'll see that kind of stuff out on the internet, on YouTube. And it has nothing to do with our walk of faith, and yet people want to divide over this issue of they're interpreting the Bible correctly. They think the earth is flat and the center of the universe, and then there's the spherical earth people that are going by also by the scriptures, because there are scriptures that seem to indicate that the earth is round. And the scientific community has embraced that view of the universe, and not without good reason. So flat earth people are all worried that because science has adopted a round earth, that they are going to have to do something different because they can't agree with pagan scientists. Okay, whatever. But let's not debate over these things and cause these to be a point of contention. To what extent should believers be involved in the political process? Who is the Antichrist? These are other questions that people debate about and have different points of view about. And to the extent that we should obey those who have the authority over us, that's a New Testament teaching. We should obey those who have rule over us. But how much should we be involved in the political process versus being involved in getting the true gospel out? I'll let you be the judge of that. I think it's far more important that we get the true gospel out that we share our Messiah with people than to spend all of our time and money and effort in trying to get a political candidate into office who never really does what he promised anyway and who's given us false hopes. But we like to believe it up until the point where that candidate that we helped get into office isn't doing what he said he would do. And so now we look for another, and this cycle continues, and we keep looking for somebody that we believe is going to be the political answer to all of our problems in government and in the way our nation is run. Let's refocus ourselves into doing the things that Messiah commanded us to do and getting out the gospel. And finally, change lust. There's this final thing that happens among Messianic believers and Torah followers is that there's been some good changes and a lot of changes that we've had to make in our lives to adjust to a new understanding of the Scriptures. And so people they get a thrill out of that change, and they want to find more changes, and they want to find more changes so they can experience that what's that called? The adrenaline rush of having a new doctrine, of having a new understanding. And so don't be quick to dismiss as false anything you learned in the church. Not everything they believe is wrong. Not everything the church taught us was wrong. And not everything you hear in the Messianic assemblies is right either. And so we need to be careful that we're not rejecting everything that we were taught and not embracing every new theory, every new wind of doctrine that comes along. Zealous people want to change everything. Some do. Things that they were taught to believe just for the sake of change and to be different. And so let's try to avoid that issue as well when we're walking out our walk of faith. Here's the summary of it all. What shall we say to all these things? Don't believe everything you hear on the internet. I think that's a good piece of advice. Don't believe everything a Messianic teacher tells you. That would be me too. Don't believe everything I tell you. Be a Berean. Okay, right, lowering in the slide. You test these things for yourself and examine these things to see whether or not they're true. If I'm teaching you something, go and look it up for yourself and verify it, or find contradiction if you can find contradiction. Because we're all responsible for our own walk before the Father, and you're not going to, when you stand before the Father, you're not going to be able to call me alongside and say, David, isn't this what you taught me? And it's not going to be about what I taught you. It's going to be about whether you listen to the Father. So don't be gullible and just believe some teacher because you think he's believable, or you have respect for him, or he has lots of letters after his name. Don't be gullible to believe just everything you're told. Examine everything. Be a Berean. Even Paul, they didn't just believe what Paul said. They went back to the Scriptures to see whether or not what Paul was saying was true. And so with any teacher, you need to go back and verify and validate. Do what Messiah did, and you will be in a good place. And so that's my final word of advice and instruction. That's how we should answer all of these problems and issues and difficulties that we run into when we come into a walk of obedience to the Messiah and to the Father's law. Now, what say you?